Hello again. So this is the first session for the second course entitled, what is the title again?
Thinking Our Present.
Yeah, Thinking Our Present. And the difference here is that the subtitle is The Task of Modernity. That's the second course entitled The Task of Modernity. And we will discuss today a little bit on that title. I'm not sure that's the best title for the project I have, and we will maybe discuss it. So let's start with this little cartoon that we may observe on, I might share my screen so that the video thing is also seeing that cartoon. And
Well, I've got the notes in front of me. I've printed them out. So it's down to Jilly whether you want it up on the screen or not.
I don't have the notes in front of me, I'm afraid.
Okay, fine.
I don't have a printer.
How do I partager l'écran? Yes, and I show my own screen. No, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, share screen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if I go here, actually. So there's this little cartoon. That's kind of funny. I don't know. You know that philosophy has to do with logics, and logics has to do with how you prove something, with syllogisms, and as far as time goes, to prove that someone is making a point by saying you're late, they would need some kind of what? Tool, a tool,
Yeah.
such as a watch or clock, to show that they are late, to indicate with their index, maybe, see that clock saying that it's 8:30 and you were supposed to be back by 8. And we worked a bit on a clock last semester with a very funny short film called Tomatoes Another Day. And it starts with a clock saying 2:00. So I was looking at it and I thought it was funny, yet I thought it was also wrong. So there's a comment below, a legend. How would you call that? Before time was invented, it's a legend?
Caption.
Caption? Mm-hmm. Caption. Before time was invented? Yeah, in a sense, yes, maybe. But do you think that we really needed, when we were human beings at that point in time, a watch or a clock to prove that someone is late?
I guess you would look by the stars or the moon or...
Exactly. I think there's a little detail in this very cartoon that kind of deconstructs the logic of the cartoon itself, right? There's the moon, a crescent of the moon, and we know enough about mankind, about the history of mankind, that for centuries, women and men were giving themselves some precisions about time through the position of the sun and the moon, and through the position of the shadows, right? So I think it's important to remember that there is actually a sense of time that we have outside technology. And that will have something to do with what I want to discuss today, which is this concept by Hartmut Rosa, which is resonance. if you are aligned, one might say, with the stars, or if you are aligned with a sense of nature, you might have an idea of time, or let's be more precise, maybe duration, through the elements of nature. Any other comment on this cartoon?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought was that time wasn't invented. The measuring of time was what was invented.
Very, very good. Very interesting comment indeed.
Yeah, resonance. I'm sure that we'll get to that. Yeah, I'll leave those thoughts until later.
Yeah. So basically, to stay connected with the moon is not a star, right? It's a spatial object. To be connected with the spatial objects and to be connected with the noises maybe of nature. You know, at night it's not the same noise. Even at dusk, there might be a silence. The transitioning from a certain type of animals to another type of animals. I think I know in French we have this hour called l'heure bleue. Do you know? Do you say that in English as well? The blue hour.
No, but I know what you mean. We call it dusk, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful phrase.
And there's also another phrase in French, which is between wolves and dogs, or between dogs and wolves. To say this very moment which is in between night and day, or in between day and night, like it is right now in Paris. And yeah, so I don't want to insist too much on it yet. I think as we are trying to think our present, it's important to remember that thinking our present has been possible throughout history. It's not something new. Every civilization, in every civilization, there have been women and men able to think about their presence in this world. And therefore, what I want to go towards with this idea of modernity is a more specific idea of what it means thinking our present. Not just thinking about the fact that we are present, but going towards something that's peculiar to our modernity. And when I say our, I mean the Western world's modernity, with the Enlightenment, with Immanuel Kant asking himself, was ist Aufklärung? What is the specificity of this question?
Can I just ask you to clarify, when you're talking about modernity, then you mean modernity with sort of a capital M, as in sort of enlightenment?
Yeah.
As opposed to the sort of contemporary mores, to use a French term, or both?
So yes, modernity, we can oppose it to many things. It depends on which paradigm you want to understand it. So let's build a few paradigms just to start with. What can we oppose the most basically modernity to?
Within kind of living memory, perhaps?
Yeah. How about a very simple word, tradition? Modernity as opposed to tradition.
Okay.
Or modernity as opposed to the classical era.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you can also oppose modernity to what comes after modernity, which would be
Post-modernity?
postmodernity, and or if you know of music, if you, you know, we say classical music and that it is a big, big hyperonym. It is a big category in which we put many, many genres of music. When actually in what we call classical music, there is classical music, there is romantic music. What else?
Baroque.
Baroque. Very true, Scott. Thank you, Scott. How are you?
Good to see you, but I don't know what I've done with my link and how hopefully you can see me, but I can't. I'm not seeing myself.
We don't see you, and that's a big miss.
Yeah, I've just got to work that out.
Okay.
If you go to
I'll let you know.
video, if you go to video in the bottom left, and then go to video settings.
I tell you, it keeps on coming up with how I need a password just to be here. So let's leave the video bit for another moment. But thank you for telling me that. Okay, I'll let you get on with the lesson. Okay, I will show my face at some point. I promise. Okay.
Yes. So as opposed to the Baroque, and as opposed to more modern forms of modernity, if I may express myself so, which are?
Sorry, I didn't understand that. More modern forms of...
I'm just building a bit of a paradox. What we called in music, contemporary music. And in philosophy, contemporary philosophy, etc., etc. So we also oppose, in some paradigm, modernity to contemporary age.
Well, that was my question. Are we working... which modernity are we talking about? When you refer to it throughout your notes, do you mean the sort of the Age of Enlightenment, Age of Reason modernity, or are we sort of switching categories?
Yeah, right now it's done on purpose that it's not specified.
Okay.
Because I want to question it. I want to have us build kind of a problem on that.
Okay. Understood, thanks.
And so that's precisely what I'm coming to right now. Titles. Let's compare two titles. The one given to this course and one slightly different that was mistakenly given to it on a social media, not to name it Facebook. So my idea was thinking our present, and someone who's really lovely and helping me manage stuff created the class on Facebook, but she put our time, which is slightly different. And in a sense, it doesn't matter. But in another sense, since in philosophy, words are tools and we are trying to conceptualize our tools, I am trying to be specific on why here I want to use the word present. So do those two titles, mean the same thing to you? Thinking our present and thinking our time?
Well, I would say definitely not. Time, I think of time as having duration, and present as, by definition, not having duration.
Mm-hmm. So actually thinking our time, which would be more difficult to think? Thinking our present or thinking our time?
It's more difficult to think our present because every moment is the present. And so it's difficult to have cognizance of that because it's already gone.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of, you've heard of a philosopher named Saint Augustine, right? Who has this very famous passage on time saying that when I talk about time, when I use the word time, I use it and I feel like I understand what I'm talking about. But as soon as someone is asking me to define time, I cannot anymore. And for the present, he says exactly what you said, which is that when you think of it, it becomes so minute that we cannot grasp anything. And the present seems to be a very difficult object to conceptualize indeed.
It's like those opticons, isn't it, where you've got the spinning kind of image of the horse jumping over the barrier, but it's made up of tiny versions of that that really don't make any sense in their own sense until the thing spins.
So we already worked a bit on the next questions, exactly the same thing, and if not, how so? How would you express the difference? We did a little bit. Could we say a bit more, maybe?
Of the difference between the two?
What does the concept, or let's say the notion of time, incorporate that the notion of present does not incorporate?
Time could be considered as this an ongoing thing, or we could fix it by having a start time and an end time as our focus of analysis. The present is always just the present. It's that blip. It doesn't have duration. That's all that we can study. There's no morphing the present. There's a lot more that we can do with the time, with the notion of time, in terms of taking what we want from it.
Yeah. And that's a very good answer. I would have been even, I would have said something much simpler, that the idea of time doesn't incorporate the idea of future and of past. No, sorry, the contrary. The idea of present doesn't incorporate the past and the future, whereas the idea of time incorporate not only the past, the future, but also maybe the conditional, etc. Many forms of time that we have more ideas of through grammar, because in grammar we have many tenses that makes us consider time not only in the indicative, but also on the perspective of other modes. So time is a huge topic in philosophy. There's a huge book that made a big impact in philosophy by Heidegger called Being and Time. Let's not comment on that for now, because what I want actually is the contrary, is to restrain the scope and go towards the present. So I will say why personally I choose the present and not time as our subjects. Personally, I think that it is important to keep the first one, thinking our present, because first, there is nowadays a philosophical trend that tries to avoid the broad use of the word time, as it is very vague. See in particular Étienne Klein and Vincent Bontemps' Les autres noms du temps, the other names of time. It was a colloquium that should have happened a few weeks ago, and that was cancelled due to a disease you might have heard of. And their project is to operate a cleaning of the verbal situation, as Paul Valéry put it. You understand the cleaning of the verbal situation? It's the idea that in the word time, there's actually so many things that we can be discussing about. And we're not sure that when physicists such as Einstein and philosophers such as Kant are talking about time, if they are talking about the same thing. So there are many words we could use to specify what we are talking about, such as duration, simultaneity, presence, coincidence, many things.
Whereas, do you think the word present is purer and easier to understand between us?
Well, at least, I'm not, so that's a good question, thank you. So at first we were saying that the idea of the present or the notion of the present is actually more difficult to conceptualize. But what we are seeing now is that since the notion of time is so broad and that it incorporates the present, it's even harder actually. In a sense, maybe not all the time. And thus, the word present seems preferable as it is what I try to theorize in its complex relationship with the past and the future, and in its essential relationship with the notion of modernity. We will come back to your question further, Karen, as to what I mean by modernity. And actually, that will be the task of the semester to better understand what we can mean by modernity.
Can I ask then, what do you mean by its essential relationship with the notion of modernity?
So, yeah, so here it might be good that I recall something that we saw last semester, actually this summer, which was that there's this text by Kant that I mentioned already, named Was ist Aufklärung? What is enlightenment? Which was an answer in newspaper that Kant gave to the question a journalist was asking, was ist Aufklärung? What is enlightenment? And he defines it as modernity, and what is modernity is this particular task, according to Kant, to question our thinking in the very historical moment that it emerges in. Not doing philosophy as if it doesn't matter when you live, in which society you belong, but doing society trying to understand the very importance of the moment you are living in. And this is
can I ask, is that moment a subjective moment, or does Kant think of it as being a shared moment?
So the idea of subjective is complex in Kant's philosophy, because for Kant, time is subjective, but not in the sense we usually say it. It's subjective as it belongs in the subject's mind. It is the way the space and time, according to Kant, are categories through which we perceive events. They are what he names the transcendental. And so in the sense, they are what is in the mind of the subject, yet it is not subjective in the sense that it is a matter of opinion.
So like it's a filter that you look through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, in physics, it is questions whether time exists or not, somehow. And that's because if everything is determined, then what the future is and what the past is, it's already there. It's just that we are at a certain moment in the sequence of events. And so that's in Einstein's philosophy. And Einstein was a reader of Kant, yet there are ways in which their views are very different. We don't have to go that deep right now. We can just go towards a problematization of time and change. Number 3. I hope Scott and James are doing fine, and I'm not tiring them too much, or Karen and Gilly.
No, it's interesting.
Sorry, James, you go first.
After you, Scott.
Oh, you're so generous, James. Always a gent. No, I'm finding it deeply interesting, having not done the reading. I'm really enjoying the fact that Karen and Gilly are advancing a lot of the commentary that's going alongside what you're advancing, Antoine. So, you know, hopefully I'll take part more possibly next week, but really enjoying the class so far.
Thank you. James, any comment?
No, I'm just enjoying listening to what you're saying, really. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Do pitch in, guys, please. I get very, very bored of the sound of my own voice if you let me.
Just to go on from that, Karen, I think Antoine will attest to the fact that in the first in the introduction, I was vocal, so don't worry, I will be vocal at another stage. Okay.
Good. I look forward to it. Thanks, Scott.
So let's try another exercise, which I call a problematization. If we put two words together, two substantive, you know in grammar what we call a substantive, right? Like a noun, time, change, two substantives, linked, by a preposition of coordination, which is and, time and change. Two items and a relationship symbolized by the word and. So I say here we have two notions, and as in a philosophy paper, our task would be to problematize their relationship. The word and establishes a relationship, yet a very vague one. If we had but, it would be more specifically an opposition, or in a sense, something that goes like a concession or something like that. But and it's very free to relate them the way you want. That's why I'm saying next that this coordination keeps as a virtual or as a virtuality many more specific relationships that we would have to determine and explore in their virtual interactions. Yes, if I say time and change, what could be the possible interactions? The possible relationships?
They could be completely separate. One could impact on well, time could impact on change, but maybe change could not impact on time.
Yeah.
Well, the use of and,
yeah,
it separates out time from change.
Yeah, it separates time from change. It takes for granted that change is not time. Is that what you're saying?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good remark. And if we really think about what the implications of change are, don't they involve time?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a strange relationship, right? At first, it seems that it's very free, but if we start analyzing the concepts or the notions, the notion of change, does it require time? And we just said yes.
Yeah. I think the phrase time and change could better be written time is change.
Could you have a stasis at any point? I don't know.
Can we?
Could you have what?
Stasis. Is there ability for time to move forward, but for something not to change?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't mean time stopping then?
No. I mean that time can have an impact on, you know, kind of the stability of something. But it can't go the other way, is what I was trying to say earlier, that change can't in itself change time. But maybe there is not necessarily a relationship between two things. I'm thinking again, sort of physics, and is there something where something can be in stasis through time?
Yeah. It's a very deep question of physics. Etienne Klein discusses it a lot, actually. Etienne Klein thinks a lot about time. And so the question would be, is time independent from the events that are occurring in time? Would there be time if there were no events? There's even this phrase saying that time is the measure or the measurement of change. But you could also say, inverted, that change is the measurement of time, as a clock or watch show.
I think there was someone that you like, Antoine, that thought about this too. David Bowie.
Yeah.
It may change me, but I can't change time, wasn't it?
I was thinking about that too. Yeah, and we will discuss something similar after in the little Platonic dialogue or Socratic dialogue that I had with a friend the other day. So that's what we are coming up to now. A dialogue I had with a friend online may help us go further into that problem. So that person at some point said, haha, I cannot change what will change me. This is what I say to myself. And I must say that I was a bit surprised by that sentence. Therefore, I wrote, I wish my mind could understand that. I cannot change what will change me. And she said, it means that I don't have the strength or the power to manipulate or direct what can change me. The meaning of change is like transform or open up or close, but rather open up. Hope that helps. And I was not a really nice friend because I said, yes, but not much. And she said, shit, It's a matter of temporality, I said. Maybe it's because it's too obvious that I'm not sure. The will in what will change me, the will, you cannot change the future indeed. That's why I'm trying to work on the present. And she said, fair game, and with good reason. Temporality makes itself permanent then. And I wasn't sure what really she was saying. And it made me think about yoga when she said that. You know, the yoga masters that we can call yogis, they often say to focus on the present and that you can only operate change by staying focused on your movements, on what you're doing right now in the present moment, because the future doesn't exist and the past no longer exists, and our mind tends to flee these ways, but it's bad for our peacefulness. And I said, yogis are usually too simplistic about the present, that yet they have a point. Simplistic because in a way, I can change the future. I can decide to no longer drink or smoke. And I can decide and I can change the past in a subjective way. What happened did happen, but I can work on the what and its weight. And my friend said, the past is weight. I write it out so I don't have to carry it with me. I agree that the future starts with the present. Is the present only the and that made me think about something that we did last semester. So about that chapter I mentioned with you, Gilly, the chapter of disgrace that's so harsh, and that there's this idea that the present is the specific moment in which events are not yet written in stone. You can still act to operate a change so that you don't have regrets through the rest of your life. And as that became to, as that turned out to become the definition I made mine of the present, the moment in which things are not yet written in stone, I was asking is the present only the moment when things are changeable? Is that enough to define the present? The moment when I can prevent them or trigger them. In other words, present as the moment of action.
Opportunity?
Opportunity, yeah, or action. And the Greek had a word for that. You remember the Greek word? The moment for opportunity and the consciousness of it. It starts with a K. K-A-I-R-O-S, Kairos. Or Kairos. So linking the notion of present to the one of change is important to me right now. I think it's the heart of my problem. And you know that Deleuze, which is a philosopher I cherish, used to say that we have a wrong conception of a problem. There's this way we say in the popular language, oh, I have a problem as something bad. But actually, it's the fact of not having a problem that's bad. Yes, if your car is no longer working, it can be phrased as a problem. Yes, and you have to solve this problem. But it's not a problem in a philosophical sense. What Deleuze and I here mean by problem is when you understand that inside you there is something that you can work on that makes you grow, that makes you better. And because there's something personal about it, but also something that by thinking in a non-personal way, not just opinions, but by really thinking about it, you progress. And therefore, knowing your problem is good. And it's actually what Deleuze calls constructivism. The idea that you build things, construct, build, and building, such as in bodybuilding, building things with readings, with questionings, with talking with friends who want to think with you, that's actually strengthening your soul or your subjectivity, your mind. So, and my friend was nice, and I ended up the abstract here. I do think you are very committed to understanding this on a multitude of levels, but everyone's present is different. It's hard to grapple with the incongruities. And I thought that was an interesting new turn of the conversation that she was proposing, suggesting, but as it's not really afterwards, not really in the scope of our class, I stopped here. And I want to ask you a few questions. On the base of this little dialogue, would you say that you agree that in a sense, the future can be changed, and in another sense, the past can be?
Shall I go ahead? Yes, the future can be changed. We cannot help but change it. Everything that happens changes it. Everything that doesn't happen changes it. The past, in a different sense, absolutely can be changed, because once it's gone, the past exists as a subjective experience of the past. In other words, it's something that's in our presence. And anyone that's grown old will understand the extent to which the past is a very mutable experience, but it's an experience that we have in the present.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Julie?
I agree. I think that it's all about how you remember, how you put weight upon things, when new experiences or different versions of your how you grow will change how you feel about something in the past. I'm just thinking about when an event happens where two or more people have a shared agreed view of it, how that might slow down or hamper the reinterpretation of that past event. But I think generally I agree with Karen. The future, I'm not so sure, because it almost doesn't exist. So I find it difficult to talk about it. So the idea that it can be changed is almost it doesn't, those two things don't match together in a way, because there is nothing to change at this point in time.
Go ahead.
That's it.
Well, I was thinking that if the present exists, it has to exist as a moment, a stopping point in some kind of stream. That there has to be some kind of historical real past, and therefore some kind of real future for the present to be a moment within it. There has to be something that's it's in, and in that sense there has to be a future.
Yeah, I was thinking
I don't know that I agree with that. It's just one way of conceiving it.
Yeah, your comments made me think about this French philosopher who teaches maybe still at Stanford. His name is Jean-Pierre Dupuy. Have you heard of him?
No.
He's written a book that got quite famous called For an Enlightened Catastrophism. So catastrophism is when you show the future as something catastrophic. And enlightened is the same idea we encountered before. But maybe it's slightly different. Let's see. So his idea is that if we want not catastrophic events to happen in the future, if we want to avoid them, if we want to avoid the worst case scenario as our future, we actually better describe this worst case scenario as what will happen, so that we get really afraid and start acting to actually change things now so that it doesn't happen. So we give an image of the future so that this future doesn't happen.
Or the alternative is that we give up because it's too much. Yeah.
That's a good point too. Yeah. James or Scott?
I was going to say that sounds like Bukowskiism. Who didn't? I think Charles Bukowski was very much. Whilst it took him years to write his books and stuff, he was of a view, from what I read recently, that if you don't think you're going to achieve something, then don't even start in the first place, which is quite grim, really. But yeah. But I was in thinking of change. I had a nice experience thinking about your dialogue and thinking about the present, the past, and the future. It's amazing when you meet people that you haven't seen for years and you just happen to be sat in the same room at the same time, and there's such a connection between the people around the table that all of those the past melts into the present, and the future kind of you hope that you'll see one another into the future, but you pick up where you left off, and also in terms of the change that you can be, you may be changed physically, or even and in other ways, but perhaps it's because you haven't seen each other for a while, but it's such an amazing ability that we have in time just to situate things and see and recognize that things move on or that certain things don't, and friendship kind of points to that, I think. But that's something else.
Yeah.
Well, we have a phrase for it, don't we? It's as if time melts away.
Yeah, and it can really be the case, can't it? When you catch it.
Absolutely, it certainly feels that way.
Yeah.
And does that go to a sort of a level of humanity where we think that there is an essence of somebody that doesn't change? That you connect with that, and everything else in their lives and the changes that are wrought around them actually doesn't change something deeper within that person that allows you to have that connection back.
There is the very opposite thing in Proust's In Search of Lost Time, where he meets his lovers again throughout the books, and feels like they are complete strangers, and in this experiences himself as someone who's been several persons throughout his life, and that some of the persons have now been dead for a long time.
Luckily, I was meeting platonic friends, so that question didn't come up. But and in a way, I think that probably does. There's probably less room for argumentation or sentimentalism or trying to have a fixed opinion about things.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Well, there's also the issue of who we are and who we think we are and who the other person thinks we are.
Yeah.
Presumably they're not all the same. That there's going to be a fair degree of projection. When I meet an old friend, I've already decided that they're a friend.
Yeah, I
And
kind
then
of,
I assess it to the extent to which they still match this term friend.
yeah.
I know that's the stuff, that's what I bring to the meeting. That has nothing to do with who they are, who they used to be, who they are now. And that could depend on my mood that day. It could depend on the lighting in the cafe. Who knows? Who know what clothes they're wearing.
That's so shallow, Karen, honestly.
And I'm not alone in being shallow.
I'm joking.
But I mean, that's just the nature of our sort of relationship to ourselves and other people, isn't it? Really, I don't think it has to do with time as such. We're social animals, and we negotiate the social much as we negotiate our relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. There's maybe a way we statufy. Does that word exist in English? Statufy?
No.
Turn people into statues?
Mm-hmm. I know what you mean.
What,
I don't know what
fix them.
No, uphold them, kind of put them on a pedestal.
Okay, I get it.
Really, more like crystallize them, you know,
Okay.
as if we don't really take into account the fact that they might well have changed through the years we've not seen them,
Right.
and we take for granted that our eyes see them like they used to be, and they're actually a different person. James, would you like to add something?
Just to say, really, the future I think can be changed. The past I don't think can be changed, really. But everyone else came up with sort of more interesting answers, but that's what I sort of the conclusion I came to, really.
Can you repeat it, because I didn't grasp it?
The future can be changed, but the past can't be changed. It's already been written.
Yeah, that's a possible conception as well. Yeah, the idea that the past is what is written in stone, and the future, in a sense, would be more malleable, because as we act in the present, we are actually acting on the future.
Mm.
Yeah. So there are several ways to conceive of these interactions. And let's go to question 2. Yet, would you say that the present, so now that we have maybe agreed that in a sense we can change the future, and in a sense, a more subjective one, we can change the past, yet would you say that the present still is the moment in which change can be operated? And if so, how so?
Just the time of possibility, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it's the idea that it's the time of action, because even if you change the future in the future, when you actually change it, it will be your present, right? And maybe at some point in the past, you changed things, but you changed things when at that moment it was a present. So as we might say, a present of the past and the present of the future.
Oh, but isn't the present the point at which we change the future, and also the point at which we don't change the future? It's the point at which everything happens or doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to question, is that maybe change is only operated in the present.
Well, it can only be operated in the present because everything is operated in the present.
Yeah.
But do you have conscious awareness of that? Is it an enough time in a way to understand what it is that you're doing? Because in that very maybe 3-second loop, you are thinking, this is what has come at me, this is how I would and this is how I interpret it. This is how I will then think about the opportunities for action. So I have maybe 3 different routes I can take at this point. Which would these will be the better point, the better route? I will then start to enact that. I'm thinking about how I'm going to enact that, and then do you know what? That's well, that was at least 5 seconds, wasn't it? So it's kind of how, within that, because it's interesting. So I'm learning tennis at the moment. So I'm seeing the ball coming towards me really fast, and my swing is terrible. Ball goes off over there. I'm learning how to slow time down to see that ball come at me slower, so that I have more opportunity for action. And it's a skill, but I believe I can do it. I believe I can slow time down to become a better tennis player, but only by so much. So that's my struggle that I'm sharing.
That's really interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
I was thinking more of the tennis there than the things before, in a way. And yesterday I was listening to a bit of football, and it was more about how the actual attacker had to stop thinking about the ball or anything like that, and just act instinctively, because then he actually scored the goal rather than overthinking it. That's not aimed at you.
But I would argue that comes with great repetition and great practice, so that your brain is able to do that faster and faster and almost not think about it. It probably is, but it's thinking about it so quickly, it's so used to it, that it becomes what we call instinct.
Okay.
Possibly.
Can I take this? I can't believe I'm talking about sport right now. If we kind of synthesize and take apart all of these ideas about sport and the extent to which we should or shouldn't be kind of actively conscious of time, cricketers who have a ball coming at them at great speed always believe, like yourself, that they slow time, that they aim, that they're looking at what's happening and that they're responding to what they're seeing. It turns out that immediately prior to the point at which they swing and hit that ball, they close their eyes.
Dangerous.
Make of that what you will.
Mm. Yeah. Maybe they're imagining it, what they're doing, and that's better than seeing it.
Is it better to just let your muscle memory do it and put down the thinking, the overthinking? Mm. Is it an acknowledgement of the fact that they're not really in control of anything? But if they feel that way, then they're going to undermine their skills,
Yeah. If you take it away from sport and think about a baby trying to stand or grasp something versus an adult doing it, is it just about the fact that we're getting better and better at dealing, or as we think we are, dealing with the present, but perhaps maybe we're not, maybe we're getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's come up in the conversation so far is we're talking about the present in different senses. I've been talking about the present as a thing that's sort of outside of myself. You, Julie, have been talking about the present as having several seconds of processing. That's quite different than the way I've been conceiving of the present. The present doesn't have several seconds. Yeah. It doesn't have any seconds. It's just there. It's gone.
So is it so small it doesn't almost register? It's
correct. That would be my definition of the present. It's not the subjective human present of a moment that we take. It's something else entirely. It's just, if you imagine time as being a continuum or a stream, it's a point in it. It has nothing to do with our consciousness at all. So there's 2 very different ways of looking at the present right there.
So how can one affect any change if it's such a tiny portion that we can't act within it?
Well, there's the assumption that affecting changes is something that humans do. My idea that everything that happens and doesn't happen affects change includes everything from the microscopic to the cosmic. And as such, humans are barely even in that mix. They're not the masters, the players in affecting change at all. And I mean, it sort of came up in this dialogue, this sort of idea that if you give up drinking and smoking, yes, of course, something will have changed because your behavior has changed. So you could say that if you give up drinking, what has changed is in the future you won't drink, you won't be drinking anymore. However, what was implicit in this idea that we would give up drinking is the idea that there would be some benefit to it, that there would be a reason behind it that would play out in some way, hopefully, presumably a longer or happier life or something along those lines. I would argue that that change is just too much of a tangled mess. The causal link between giving up drinking and improved health is optimism at best. You might get hit by a bus tomorrow is the cliche, isn't it? But all of these conceptions of time have to do with humans positioning ourselves in a certain way, like a kind of an anthropocentric arrogance, and an emotional desire to feel like we have power over things.
Or even over ourselves.
Yeah, well, particularly over ourselves, because, in the end, we're the ones that matter, aren't we? So, yeah, so we're already kind of coming up against these two very different sort of, there's the sort of the physics end of time, how you might conceive of time, and then there's the uses that human beings put to it. So anyway, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, it's very good. So let's summarize a bit maybe. There is this sense, maybe, let's say it like that if I change something, it's always in the present. So that when our problematization is time and change, as I said before, we can say that we can formulate it or formulate an answer, a first answer to a problem that we have created. In the problem would be, in what form of time would I or would a subject operate change in the form of the present? Yeah, very simple answer to a basic formulation of a problem. Indeed, in a way, I can say that I can change the past subjectively. Indeed, I can change the future. But even though I say that, it's always in the present that I change the future, or in the present that I change the past, that I operate this change. Let's move a bit further. Would you say that there are many simultaneous presents or one present?
Yeah, that was what I was raising just now, really, wasn't it?
It's a subjective versus an objective, isn't it? Yeah.
So
let's give an example, though.
Okay, well, then there are many experiences of the present.
Yeah.
But arguably there is only the one present.
Yeah. I give you an example, and from there we try to have a little discussion with a specific thing. If you go to a garden, which is a zoo for butterflies, a butterfly garden, and you know of butterflies enough that most of them live as butterflies only one day, perhaps 3 days or a week, and many just one day. And you see that the way they move in space and interact with flowers is different from the way you interact with flowers and this environment that you share with them. So at this moment, in this experience, you kind of understand that maybe the time through which you subjectively experience this moment is not the same that the butterfly has, even though you are simultaneous beings. You live in the same time, but you live things through different time frames.
Does a butterfly have a time frame in terms of its understanding of time?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? Whether the butterfly has consciousness or not comes
So
into that question,
yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah, so time really only means anything to humans in that sense.
If time means only something to humans in that sense, could we not say that someone who is of an older generation or who is older has a different, that time speeds up as you get older, they say? And could it then mean that they have a different, they interact differently with time to someone who's a bit younger? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree. School holidays used to last forever.
Yes, they could be really boring.
And so if we take the butterfly again, we may think of one thing, that the butterfly has experienced a change in its life recently, as it has being metamorphosed from a caterpillar to a butterfly through a chrysalid. That's the way you say it.
Chrysalis.
Chrysalis, beautiful word. And so it has experienced a change, and yet can it operate changes the same way a human being, not to overrate human beings, but just to think of basic capacities that we have, in the same way that a human being can operate change? Let's say, for instance, there are human beings on this planet. They are tired of this garden. They think this garden is useless. It would be much better to build a football field instead of the garden.
It's eminently sensible.
Yeah, and they would operate a change. A butterfly is not likely to operate such a change. There is something in mankind as regards our capacity and will to change things that strongly overpass the one of many of our cousins, animal cousins.
I think it's interesting that you used the butterfly in your example, because chaos theory is always described as the butterfly flaps its wings in one place and a tornado happens in another. Well, we could say to ourselves, what if we put a football pitch there? But it doesn't necessarily follow that that football pitch will be made, that it will happen. That chaos acts on our will, much as a butterfly might act on or within chaos. So we're always assuming that if we want a football pitch, that we're going to get a football pitch, and that if we get a football pitch, it means that the butterflies won't have their garden anymore. Well, there's no reason at all why the butterflies can't hang out with the football players, say, or who knows? I mean, the point is that there is such a massive variety of possibility, nearly all of which won't be what we intended. Now, is that true for our animal cousins too? I would argue probably yes, it is. That whatever, you know, the butterfly might intend to go off and find some nectar somewhere, but in landing on a flower might cause a drop of water to fall, which might be that one drop of water that causes the dam to break. You know, we assume that the butterfly has less power to affect change than us because it's not actively choosing to affect change in the way that we are. But our active choice to affect change isn't the same as affecting change.
Well, I think you have a good point, because we thought we would go the same way in 2020 that we were going in 2019, and something even smaller than a butterfly changed everything. Yes. And probably something that doesn't have will in the same sense that we have will. So I agree with your idea.
Although if you go further back, it was because of an unintended consequence of human action on the environment that became an unnatural habitat for that organism.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that may or may not be the case in this case, but if you think about another pandemic that's happened within our lifetime, HIV, nobody was sort of running around and saying, you know, human beings are ruining the environment and that's where HIV has come from. We were happy to understand that pandemics happen from time to time, that they happen not even necessarily to human beings, and that they happened before human beings started ruining the world. So again, it's to do with how we weight these things, how we explain away cause and effect. Yes, it seems to be our belief that something to do with humans encroaching upon the natural, whatever we mean by the natural, might have caused this latest pandemic. That's just a guess based on the fact that we don't know the first thing about what's going on.
Right, you have to laugh at it, really. That's good.
Yeah. I do agree with Gilly, though, when she says that there is something human in this pandemic, and there was something human in the pandemic that you mentioned, Karen, before, which was AIDS. Those zoonoses, they have to do with the fact that we are not dealing very well with nature, and that we eat strange food, and that we have markets and problematic habits.
So do you situate yourself outside of nature then?
No. I'm more of a Spinozist kind of thinker. So if I may call myself that, so I totally see myself as a part of nature. Yet,
because your implication is that there is a right way of interacting with nature and a wrong way of interacting with nature, as if we are somehow outside of it.
Totally. I do think that even the fact that we are part of nature doesn't imply that there are no bad or good ways to interact with nature. Indeed, yeah.
But then bad or good according to whom? According to whose definition of what catastrophe is?
According to life, you can destroy much life on Earth, which is what we have been doing through centuries, to decades and centuries, and there are.
But if you were to ask a microbe or ask a rat, they would say, "Excellent, bring it on! All the more life for us, all the more space for us, all the more opportunity for us." So it's the fact that we frame good and bad results in terms of human benefit,
Not only
principally.
in terms of biodiversity, actually.
But again, that assumes that biodiversity is a good thing. There have been points in history where there has been a massive decline in numbers of species, and that has allowed for opportunities for other things to happen. Mammals, for example.
guess there's a sort of a kind of blue planet watcher view of the kind of hoped for or sort of idealized balance of nature. And perhaps that isn't ever going to be the case, because, as you say, there is the will to live, the selfish kind of gene idea of there has to be a certain amount of fighting for dominance within nature, because that is what nature is. It's a sort of red in tooth and claw kind of system. But perhaps because we have greater consciousness of change, of how to decide on what we call good and what we call bad, that there should be more collaborative agreement on what some of those phrases might mean to us, and then to be able to choose a course that is the best of all possible outcomes given need.
Yeah.
I mean this philosophically, not environmentally, but
Yeah.
how do we know? How do we know that what we think is best will be best? I mean, there's an old phrase about the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Of course, yes. No, I take your point.
I mean, I did used to live a very, very, very deep green life. I'm not opposing these things. I'm just sort of
it's again, it's
ideas and
it's not really about the greenness of the conversation. It's just about how if we're looking at affecting change as a conscious being, in that sense, whether you're talking about the environment or a way to hit a tennis ball or anything, there must be potentially some merit to the decision of that moment of change. How does one decide, and how does one put that kind of contextual merit around that decision in some way?
I'm with you. It comes to a projection into the future about what it is that we want to achieve, without stepping away from the here and now and positioning ourselves into the future. We can't assess merit then.
I would say that this questioning, even though it's very interesting, is way beyond the topic of the class, and I'm not prepared for it. So if we can come back, that would be great. In the same idea, I was asking in question 4, is it illusory to elaborate one conception of the present when an argument can be made that every living being is entitled to have its legitimate conception of its own present? And that can actually be in the same line as what you were discussing, Karen, in a way. Yet, I think we've talked about that a lot. Let's go towards 4 now, the big 4, reformulate a possible remorse. So I'm gonna make here a very long sentence to make you maybe to express why I might have a remorse regarding the title of the course. So if modernity can indeed be defined as a moment in the history of thought when thinkers such as Kant ask themselves, what is the specificity of the moment we or they are facing, which is a bit tautological if you think of it. And if my problem is less what is the link between thought and the specific moment in history I think in, but how we, let's say, today's most acute thinkers, of course I belong in that group, have moved from there to the problem of, I come back to the beginning, but how we have moved from there, from this idea of modernity as thinking the specific time in history we're in, to the problem of how can we, public speakers and writers, express the conditions of our present in prevision of our future so that we as a species reduce the effects of the catastrophe we, our generation and the latest generations before us of civilized consumers have generated, then the title of the course ought to be changed, because time has passed since I proposed it, and fortunately my thoughts did not get stuck in the past. Thus, I now engage you to suggest a few propositions to reformulate the title of the course. So as I explained, maybe a bit too too complex manner, my idea is that I'm less in the perspective of Kant, which is to think what is the specific moment my thinking takes place in, but I'm more in the perspective of the green thinkers today, as we mentioned them a bit before, which is how, now that we have kind of understood the kind of situations we are in, and that we are facing a challenge, a huge challenge, can we express ourselves so that there is something happening, something that we can call a change?
Like a zeitgeist?
A zeitgeist, if you will. Zeitgeist, to me, is still linked to modernism and Kant, in the sense that zeitgeist has to do with, I think Geist means figure, and Zeit, it means time.
Spirit. Ghost, isn't it? It's the spirit of the age, it translates literally as.
Yeah, but I think it's more or less a vision of the time. Zeitgeist is a conception of our time. And here I'm less interested in how we conceive our time than how we conceive of the relationship between thinking and acting, if you will. So the title will no longer be Thinking Our Present, the Task of Modernity, but something else.
I personally, like I said before, so I won't go on at length, but I think there's a lot of assumptions. If we look at 4C, you're making assumptions about a catastrophe, you're making assumptions about the civilized having done something wrong, which means that you're splitting the civilized and the uncivilized. There's all manner of assumptions in that, that without really unpicking, I wouldn't know whether I agreed with. So if we take that as a kind of a preposition, supposition, then you're going to end up responding to E quite differently. I mean, I wrote, thinking our present is catastrophic. In other words, there's a sort of a play on words there, isn't it? Thinking our present, thinking that our present is catastrophic. Yeah. In other words, the assumption that our present is catastrophic.
Yeah.
But it is also the idea of to think our present is to conjure the idea of the catastrophic into existence.
So what do you suggest as a title? I'm going to write it.
Thinking our present is catastrophic.
I need to find a document.
Did that make sense to anybody?
It made sense to me, yeah.
Good.
But you're it's quite a sort of it's the difference between the kind of the irony of what you're saying. It might. Going back to the book that you mentioned earlier, The Enlightened Catastrophe, is it? The Enlightened Catastrophic Look? And the fact that you have to imagine the worst case scenario, so that one can do something to affect that change. I think what Karen is suggesting is that that is potentially a false premise, that it might not be a catastrophe, it just might be the way of thinking about it, that we feel quite catastrophic at the moment, that it might be a false premise in a sense. Is that correct?
It assumes that we can know what the best case scenario is, and it also assumes that if we try to improve our lot, that we will achieve that. I would challenge both those assumptions.
The only catastrophe we know about is that we will die.
I don't find that remotely catastrophic. I'm what's known as a compostist.
Yeah, no, I agree. But if we can think of that's the sort of almost the worst case scenario, in the sense of, you know, something will end and that end will be bad, that is kind of what I feel catastrophe is referring to. So whether that be planetary, whether that be, you know, ecologically, whatever it might be, what is the worst case scenario that humans generally feel? It is death. So is that a fair assumption that we're talking about here, that it's the worst thing, and therefore enacting change can divert?
It is a fair assumption, but it's not wholly shared. I would, some of what I'm saying is stuff I believe in. Sometimes I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but it could also be argued that the worst case scenario is to have your loved ones die, and to have everyone and everything around you die and you don't.
True, yeah. It is death of somebody or something, or, you know, it's a concept of ending when one doesn't want that to end. Yeah.
Did you suggest the title, Gilly? I'm not sure if you did or not.
No, I haven't yet, because I've been going along with it rather than reading the notes ahead. So I will have to go away potentially as homework and think it through.
Okay. James, do you have one?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Scott?
Well, I've been going along with it too, but I just hope we can perhaps come up with something a tiny bit happier.
Butterflies and humans. How about
Sounds
that?
good to me. I'm already on that wavelength.
Well, what about describing our shared experience and sort of saying we are thinking at present?
So we are thinking at the present. Well, we are thinking our present.
At present is how we'd say at the present, if that works in translation, but thinking at present.
But the exercise I'm proposing here is more specific than that. If you followed, I agree with what you said, that you don't have to take all the assumptions I have in C as yours. So I receive your suggestions of titles as very fair. Yet, if we take them as okay assumptions, can we try to come up with a title that would specify better the problem that we've been dealing with?
How about now what? Question mark.
Okay.
I like that.
Okay, well then if now what is in the picture, well then we're thinking our future, aren't we? Not our present.
It's almost, that's a play on the words, in the sense that it's like what is now, and just kind of.
Nice. You're way ahead of me there. That's good. I like that.
Playing with it's actually playing with the phrase now.
It's both things.
Interesting. And yeah. So you know, I'm not necessarily changing the title. It's just an exercise that we are doing to.
Oh, now you tell us.
To actually, because when you do philosophy in the Western world, what we mean by that is actually a work on words, more or less, with words at least. And if I have the title, so I write it again, which is Thinking Our Present. So I chose the word think, the verb think, in a specific form, ing form, which is the form of the present action, right? Thinking our, something communal, something that we share, present, as opposed to time that we've discussed before. And then subtitle, the task, we haven't discussed that yet, the task of modernity. And we did discuss a bit what we could mean by modernity. And next time we will more. So I said that last semester we discussed a bit about modernity with this text by Michel Foucault, which is called What is Enlightenment, which I can put on our page again, and which is a text on Kant's text, which has the same title, in which Kant defines modernity as a moment in history in which thinkers think about the specific moment they live in. And I think today it's crucial to ask ourselves, haven't we come to a point in human history when everything is different, that we have to change everything that we've been doing for at least 3 centuries, since 1700. Because we
is that a sort of a key driver of this module then?
I didn't get that, sorry.
Is that a key driver of this module, this assumption that
Yeah.
300 years
Yeah.
change for the worse? That's what all of this is predicated on, is it?
Yeah, and we will
Okay.
see, I will provide proofs of that actually. Not through my own syllogisms, but through people who are very advanced scientists amongst the many who agree on the fact that we are at the edge of extinction. So it's not, to me, it's not really a matter of discussion whether it is a fact or not that mankind is at risk right now. It's a fact. And I cannot discuss it right now because too little time remains. Yet, that's precisely why, Karen, you're right to ask me, that's precisely why I tend to think that I should maybe change the title, because my problem is no longer the task of modernity, because modernity believed in the concept of progress with a capital P, which is a word that is no longer used in political discourse as it has been proven by the 2 people I mentioned before, Étienne Klein and Vincent Bontemps, who have done a lot of data research on political discourse to see that there's been a switch between the word progress to the word innovation. Innovation has replaced the word progress. And nowadays, we don't have a long view, enthusiastic view of progress. We have more a view of, will we have magical innovations that will come up very quickly to change the whole thing, the whole mess that we are into? And so I should actually find a way to say that's no longer what I mean, progress. So no longer progress, but innovation. And innovation has to do with what comes after modernity, which is post-modernity of postmodern, which can be defined with Lyotard as the end of big narrations, the end of the myth of mankind or the myth of history as an eternal progress. Not eternal, but continuous progress, as you find in Hegel's philosophy, for instance, which is modern philosophy. So I would say that I come up with a conclusion for today's class, and then I introduce next class, that I have a problem using the word postmodern as I situate myself in the perspective of Foucault, who criticized this term. Yet, you have to understand that when I use the word modernity in this title, I question it, I criticize it, because I no longer place our perspective in the idea of continuous progress, but in the idea of ecologist thinkers of nowadays that we have to use the technique in a wiser way, that we have to not say the technique is bad, but to have to be more, how would you say, wise as a species in our use of technique, not to destroy our planet. So that's the frame of the class, if you will. Now I will very quickly introduce next class, which has to do with a thinker which I should have met this summer, but as I told you, the colloquium was cancelled. And his name is Hartmut Rosa. He's a thinker of acceleration, of resonance. And you find that in the session 1, which will be next time, because actually this session was the introduction. And we will start with a small video that you might have seen already, introducing the concept of resonance in a historical time frame when we tend to speed everything, even our vacation time, to put as many activities as possible in one day. So we kind of lose touch with who we are, how we really feel with other people. We no longer take time to do things well, to be at peace with ourselves and in nature. And I put, as you can see here in the screen, a few questions that will deal with the first article, resonance as key to a successful life. And then after the questions, we will comment on 2 particular passages. And then we will ask ourselves if with this moment of COVID pandemic, it's not a good occasion to decelerate. So the contrary of accelerate. And actually, Rosa says, no, the solution is not just in decelerating in the first article that we read before. And then in the second one, it kind of feels like it's saying, yes, there's something that could be good in decelerating. So that's why I suggest that the first task of next week will be to compare these 2 articles, which have only 1 year of difference, 2019 and 2020. And then we'll be thinking about the concepts that we found in those texts through very specific, concrete examples, bread, in an Austrian documentary named Brot, delivered meals, and airlines. I haven't provided you with a translation of the one article on delivered meals yet, but I will. Any questions, any comment before the end?
Yeah, can I ask, are you a supporter of the notion of resonance?
Am I a supporter? It's new to me. I've been knowing this idea for a few months, and
Okay.
I haven't read the book yet. I want to. I will buy it soon. Everything I've seen and read about it so far, it seems that I would love it. Yeah.
Okay.
We're learning
Okay.
together.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thanks for another good class, Antoine.
You're very welcome, but more comments are welcome. More.
So I'm wondering, because I haven't done a FUB course before, is it that it tends to be a kind of very, how do you call it, kind of a vanilla approach to concepts and study from the ground up? Or do lecturers tend to have a theory which is espoused, and then that theory is tested or kind of championed throughout?
So
And do you know?
apparently, I don't teach on this platform the same way other philosophy teachers teach. I have my own approach, which is that, what can I say? I would say that the idea is that I come up with a problem that's really my problem right now, that I'm dealing with as a philosophical problem at the moment. And I'm working on it, and I'm working with you on it, knowing that you haven't studied philosophy probably as much, and that I have a pedagogical task to do, and I do it as much as well as I try to do it as well as possible, in different ways. So using different tools, sometimes a small video, sometimes a cartoon. One key idea is, about my pedagogy is that we come from notions which are words with no definitions. It's just words that we use every day, such as time, etc. And then we try to, through the class, to build concepts, which are philosophical tools that you're going to use, that we can use to deal with the problems, theoretical problems that we have built.
Okay.
Can I follow that up, Gilly? Having done a fair number of courses with a lot of different tutors, there's no generalizing. They're all massively different in their approach. I think where they do have some, where there's a sort of a shared familiar experience, it's with this combination of having a tutor who leads because they have a body of knowledge, and the idea that we all get to chip in, and that the course and any given class will change and sway according to what we bring to the conversation, and that is deemed to be good by the tutors.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a shared framework that all of FUB seems to use.
Yeah.
My personal observation is that the classes taught by professional university lecturers are quite different than those who are taught by people who are doing doctorates. Mm-hmm. Those sort of doctorate students have one particular fascination that they want to share with us. Mm-hmm. Those who've done lots and lots of teaching tend to be a little bit more laissez-faire about what gets brought to the table.
Sure.
My personal preference is to always go with an experienced lecturer, but that's because I already have some educational background, so I'm kind of comfortable with that. Other people don't like it when there's a stark division between the lecturer and the student. They prefer something more wishy-washy and chatty, in which case choose the courses that are being run by people who don't have 15 years of teaching philosophy.
Yeah,
It's very much down to kind of what works for you. The great advantage.
I was being specific about this course, particularly about whether there is a theory being espoused that will be followed through to its natural conclusion for this topic, or whether it's a sort of more kind of let's create it as we go kind of thing. But it's fine. I'm in your hands.
Very nice. It's more the second thing you said. It's more created as we go. In that sense, I'm close to a French thinker that you might have heard of named Barthes. I feel close to Barthes and Deleuze. I don't compare. I'm not that high in there, but they tend to influence me and influence the way I teach. Which I think it's very important for us to have an interaction that will actually trigger thoughts for all of us during the week in between. And it's kind of something that happens between the participants, and nothing is written in advance.
Okay.
Talking about Barthes, I took from last term the book that you advocated, which was A Lover's Discourse.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reading through it. I'm nearly on the last chapter. So very, very interesting, and does make you think about past relationships and just the subject. So I thank you.
Cool. James, anything to add?
No, I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to next week.
Too nice. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank
and I
you.
hope to see you all next time. Have a very great night.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, everybody.
Bye.
Yes, and you, Julie.
See you. Bye.
Well,
Okay. God, I'm starving.